Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasting.
July 30th, 1985 was a hot summer day in Toronto, Ontario, and 8-year-old Nicole Morin planned on spending it at the pool with her friends. The little girl donned her bathing suit, grabbed her beach towel, and said goodbye to her mother, Jeanette. It was around 11 a.m. when Nicole left her penthouse apartment and headed to the elevator to meet her friend in the lobby. But Nicole never arrived. Once Jeanette realized that her daughter was missing and called the police, the search for Nicole quickly became the largest investigation in Toronto's history up to that point. A tremendous amount of time, money, and effort was put into finding Nicole Morin, but no trace of her was found. Was this simply a crime of opportunity, or was Nicole's disappearance related to a much larger issue in Toronto in the 80s? When a person goes missing, there's a special kind of pain in the not knowing. I want to tell you the stories of those who never came home. Today, I want to tell you the story of Nicole Morin. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And this is And Then They Were Gone. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back.
I'm Kona.
And I'm Ethan.
And we're the husband and wife team behind this podcast. Each week I tell you the story of an unsolved missing persons case. Ethan doesn't know anything about the case going into the episode, and he's here to provide his reactions and questions in real time, hopefully asking some of the same ones you have at home. Now, this week's story is one that I'm sure is familiar to most, if not all, of our Canadian listeners. As I mentioned in the intro, this was the largest missing person investigation in Toronto's history at the time. This little girl disappeared so quickly and so mysteriously that people literally couldn't believe it. And it became one of those cases that just sticks with people for generations and really affected how parents raise their children.
Yeah, I mean, right away, it's terrifying to me because, I mean, you said she left her penthouse apartment, right?
Yeah.
So there's an 8-year-old girl who goes missing in a high-rise building between her apartment and the lobby.
Yeah.
Which is just, I mean, I feel like they've made movies about this. Like horror movies.
No,
you know
I know.
What I mean?
It's fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
And you don't think, I mean, you think that when you're in a contained kind of situation like that, and especially in the 80s, that everything's going to be fine. And Nicole had done this time and time again. This wasn't a new thing for her or a new thing for any of her friends. This is just what they did. And so, yeah, it was so wild. And obviously we'll get into the timeline, but it happened so fast.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a million theories running around in my head already. It's
well, yeah. And there, of course, it's been nearly 40 years, and there have been a lot of theories in that time because it has been solved. So, yeah, we'll get into all of it, but this one is just absolutely wild. Let's go ahead and get into the case of Nicole Morin. And just real quickly, to my Canadian listeners, though, I watched YouTube videos to get the pronunciation of her last name and the neighborhood that she lived in. I am trying, so if I'm a little bit wrong, I apologize. To me, her name is spelled Morin, so to me that's Morin.
Yeah.
But videos I saw pronounced it more of Moran. And then I'm going to need to pause the recording before I say her neighborhood name so I can watch another video because it is really hard.
Okay.
So that's why I'm just Toronto. But we'll get into it. Nicole Louise Morin was born on April 1st, 1977 to Jeanette and Abe Morin. The couple was married for about 12 years prior to Nicole's birth. So apparently, I did read in one source that they had been trying for a child, and that Nicole was like their miracle baby.
Oh.
But by 1985, when this story takes place, they had separated. And I don't know exactly when they separated, but Nicole and Jeanette lived in a high-rise in Toronto's Etobicoke neighborhood. The apartment building, located at 627 The West Mall, was vast, with 429 units and countless utility rooms, storage rooms, and underground parking garages.
That is a massive building.
Yeah. So they lived on the 20th floor, which was the top floor. So, but yeah, 429 apartment units.
And for the listeners at home, she did, in fact, pause the recording to get the correct pronunciation.
I did. I had to watch the YouTube video again. Jeanette ran a daycare business out of their 20th floor apartment, and on the morning of July 30th, 1985, she was busy chasing little ones around. Nicole was on summer break from Wellsworth Public School, where she had just completed the 3rd grade. Like many children of the 80s, she had a good deal of autonomy. She was allowed to meet other friends in the building and go to the pool or play by themselves. Nicole was a clever and self-sufficient girl who knew how to make long-distance calls if she needed to, and to never talk to strangers. During the long, hot days of summer, it was normal for Nicole and her friends to play while their parents worked, staying out for hours at a time. There was no reason for anyone to believe that this Tuesday morning would be any different. At around 10:30 that morning, Nicole went downstairs to the lobby to pick up the mail for her mother. After she returned, she got ready for a swim date with a friend named Jen. Now, Nicole spoke to her, and I've read different reports. One said that they spoke on the phone. Other reports said that they spoke on the intercom. But the point is that they spoke to each other and arranged this meeting at the pool that morning. So it happened like right before.
So it wasn't necessarily something that, it wasn't like a regular occurrence. I mean, regular in the sense that it's like summer and they do this, but it wasn't like every Tuesday at this time they meet up and go to the pool.
No, it doesn't sound like it. And I don't know if they ran into each other in the lobby, perhaps beforehand, or like if, one of them just called the other and said, hey, do you want to go to the pool? But yeah, you're right. It's not like a routine.
It's not something predictable.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
So they spoke and Nicole was like, yeah, let me get changed. I'll come down to the lobby and I'll meet you. So Nicole went and put on a peach one-piece bathing suit, a green headband, and red canvas shoes. She put a change of clothes in a plastic bag, including a white t-shirt and green and white shorts. She also had a blanket, sunscreen, a brush, and a pink and purple beach towel. At about 11 a.m., Nicole said goodbye to her mother and left the apartment. About 15 minutes later, so around 11:15, Jenny buzzed back up to Nicole's apartment, and this was the intercom. Jeanette answered, and Jen asked if Nicole was almost ready. Confused, Jeanette told her that Nicole had already left and headed down to the lobby. Jeanette didn't really think much about this at the time, assuming that Nicole and Jen had just missed each other or like miscommunicated in some way. She thought maybe Nicole just went straight to the pool to meet her instead of meeting her in the lobby, or saw another friend and walked to the pool with her, or just something along those lines. And she didn't hear from Jen again after that. So Jeanette just assumed everything was fine and,
that
went
they
back.
met up and
exactly. Like, oh yeah, maybe they did miss each other, but they found each other or whatever. So she just went back to taking care of the kids, in her daycare and didn't really think much of it. But after several hours had passed, Jeanette did begin to wonder. Nicole hadn't come home, and apparently she did eat right before she left. So, I guess the fact that she didn't come home for lunch, for instance, wasn't necessarily odd. But, it seemed like it had been enough time that Jeanette was like, okay, wait a second. I haven't heard from her. Where is she? And, it's not like she can call her on her cell phone or right. anything like that.
Yeah.
So she just had to physically go down to the pool and, go get her, which is what she thought she was just going to do, or just see what was going on. So she did that, but her daughter wasn't there. Panicked, Jeanette started looking around everywhere, but there was no sign of Nicole. At around 3 p.m., she called the police. Police officers responded and immediately began searching for the 8-year-old. They began canvassing every apartment in the building, as well as looking in the parking garages and the utility rooms that I mentioned earlier. When Nicole wasn't located quickly, police began to believe that she hadn't simply wandered off on her own. They ended up setting up roadblocks and used police cars with PA systems to alert the community of the search.
Wow, that's an incredible response, especially so quickly.
Yeah, and it did all happen very quickly.
But you're still talking about a 4-hour gap.
Yeah, exactly.
Where nobody knows where she was. Her abductor could have taken her out of the building.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I mean, she could be anywhere.
Yeah, that's a lot of time.
It really is. According to Constable Nicole Sutton, one of the more recent investigators assigned to Nicole's case, by the next morning, Toronto police had officers who were just driving around giving audio descriptions of Nicole. By this point, they were certain that they had an abduction on their hands, and they were doing everything possible to find this little girl. And I mean, by this time, it had hit the news, like it was everywhere, like, again, within 24 hours of the investigation starting. Toronto Star crime reporter Cal Millar covered this story from the beginning. He described the early investigation in a 2023 interview saying, quote, "After she'd been missing overnight, all the media started to gather and the police intensified their search and brought in officers from right across Metro Toronto, and started to basically fan out across Etobicoke looking at every possible location where they might find something. The thought of investigators immediately was an abduction, and that was the biggest fear, of course, as well. In the building, they went door to door, and if they didn't get an answer in an apartment, they went in anyway. There weren't concerns about we're violating people's rights or anything like that," end quote.
Wow. I mean, obviously, like, I don't know the rules and laws on search and seizure in Canada, especially Canada in the 80s.
Right.
But wow, that's really aggressive. They were just like,
yeah, they're just like, fuck it, we're coming in.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. All 400 plus units they went into.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Every single one.
So every unit, they searched every storage facility, the parking deck.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that they questioned her friend that she was supposed to meet up with, or somebody did.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any details on that. But yeah, I mean,
I guess I'm wondering more like, did she legitimately not meet up with her friend?
Oh, yes, she did not. What had actually happened was, so Jen, the friend, you know, she had been waiting for 15 minutes when she buzzed up to Jeanette.
Yeah.
And Jeanette's like, no, she's down there. And Jen actually waited in the lobby for apparently another half an hour and didn't see her. And then was like, okay, well, I guess she's not coming or whatever, and just left.
Now, where is the pool? Because they met in the lobby. Lobby's on ground level, so
from what I
maybe the pool's in the back or something.
It is right. From what I understand, the pool was in the back of the complex, but I don't know exactly how it's laid out. Like if there's a way to get to the pool without going through the lobby, you know.
Well, it doesn't matter. She never made it to the lobby, so
yeah, it really doesn't sound like she did.
Just throwing out questions, thoughts. You may not know this. What level of security did the building itself have?
So this is wild.
Okay, go. So you do know.
Well, kind of.
Okay.
I mean, security in terms of what?
Was there a doorman? Was there somebody at the... Is there a front desk in the lobby? Is there somebody manning that front desk?
You know,
not necessarily like private security, but just like, would somebody wandering in off the street be able to just access the lobby and then either use the elevators and go upstairs, stairs without some sort of
key or like a...
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the 80s, so key card access is kind of probably non-existent at this point, especially for residential areas, but a key of some sort.
Yeah, so I actually don't know about that. I don't believe there's a doorman. I don't believe there's that type of thing. I mean, they obviously had an intercom system, and so I think that was kind of how everything worked. So I don't know, though, if the front door was unlocked.
Yeah.
Or if you had to be buzzed in. But, you know, with a building like that, you just like press the buzzer. Somebody's going to buzz you in, you know?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I'm just wondering how many hoops this person may have had to jump through. Assuming, of course, this was not somebody in the building who took her.
Exactly. Somebody who already lived there and would have had access to everything.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. But what was wild, what I was about to say, is that there were not surveillance cameras, which in 1985 in and of itself is not crazy. The crazy part is there were supposed to be cameras installed the next day.
Shit.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that maybe deep conspiracy theory thought here, but that leads me to think that it was a resident.
Well, and police have wondered that.
Because they would have known that. Because the cameras were going
absolutely.
in. And, I mean, this could be a parent of somebody in the daycare.
That knew that Jeanette would be tied up. And yeah, I mean, it could have been anything. But yeah, I do find that interesting. And that is a question that police have. And I only read about that little tidbit about the cameras being installed the next day in an article that came out in, I want to say 2022. So a very recent article. And it was like a current investigator who says that. And they're wondering, they're like, is that just a coincidence? Or
is there familiarity?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a huge question.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, that right there, I mean, I don't believe in coincidences.
I do.
So it's very much like that. That's like, to me, that says right there that this was somebody that was potentially casing her, waiting for an opportunity. They found out through whatever homeowners association or letter or whatever saying that cameras were going to be installed. That's the cutoff date.
Right.
To do whatever they were planning on doing.
Yeah.
It's too wild to think that somebody wandered in off the street, found her.
Mm-hmm. And not the friend who was in the lobby for 45 minutes.
Yes.
Alone.
Right. And took her.
Yeah.
The day before they installed cameras.
Yeah.
It's a resident.
Yeah.
That's my working theory. The only other thought, where's the dad?
Oh, we'll get to him.
Okay.
Yeah. So Cal Millar, the reporter I was talking about, he was also a founding member of the Toronto Crime Stoppers. And this was actually the first major case that organization was involved in. So the next part, again, wild and very much a product of the 80s. Because in many of the cases that we've covered from this time period, there have been video reenactments of the crime. Like, for instance, Cherry Mahan's abduction in Pennsylvania was like the first time, because that was an early episode, so that was like the first time I'd ever heard of this being done. Because they used like her actual schoolmates in the video. Like,
oh, you're not talking. Okay.
No, I'm talking about the video reenactment and like how wild it is that they use like the actual kids who like know the missing kid in the video.
Right. Yeah. Totally re-traumatizing them.
Yeah. So in this case, they did that. And it was done by Crime Stoppers. So they became involved. They offered a $1,000 reward for Nicole's safe return. And we're talking within days of her going missing. And they printed, a ton of flyers and started distributing them. They also did a video reenactment. Nicole's friend Jen, the one she was supposed to meet that morning, played Nicole in the reenactment. And Cal Millar's own 8-year-old daughter played Jen.
Jesus.
The Toronto police did a new reenactment in, I want to say 2014-ish. But it's like it was current 8-year-olds who had no idea, just were in a video. So a little less
traumatizing.
Traumatic, probably. Yeah. But the search for Nicole quickly became the largest search in Toronto's history. Photos published in the Toronto Star the day after her disappearance. So she was on the front page of the Toronto Star on July 31st. Photos from that issue show Metro Police Constable Terry Donovan inspecting a sump pump collecting basin in the parking garage of Nicole's building. So, like, that's how deep they got into that search of the building.
They got detailed.
Yeah. A K-9 officer spent that day searching the Centennial Park area, which was right by the complex. The investigation was so quick and thorough because Nicole's suspected abduction came on the heels of 2 child murders in the area. On January 31st, 1983, a 9-year-old girl named Sharon Morningstar Keenan was abducted from a park on Brunswick Avenue in Toronto. Her body was found a week later in the freezer of a nearby boarding house. Police believe that she was kidnapped and murdered by a man named Dennis Melvin Howe. Howe was a drifter and convicted felon. He was on parole and living in Toronto at the time. When police found Sharon's body, they searched for Howe, but he managed to evade police and was never found. On October 3rd, 1984, a 9-year-old girl named Christine Jessup was home alone for less than an hour when she was abducted. Her body was found 6 months later in a field in Durham. Christine's case went unsolved until 2020, when police determined that a telephone worker named Calvin Hoover was responsible for the crime. Hoover had already died by suicide in 2015.
No connections linking the two cases.
It doesn't appear to be, no.
Okay.
Now, police don't believe that Howe had anything to do with Nicole's disappearance, the first one, because he was well out of the area and in hiding by that point.
So they think.
Yeah, but, there's a lot of heat in Toronto, so it stands to reason that he was not around. Calvin Hoover's name has been thrown around, though, as a possible suspect, but nothing concrete has been established. There was a third similar case that took place almost a year to the day after Nicole's abduction. On July 25th, 1986, 11-year-old Allison Parrott met a man who claimed to be a photographer. He told the little girl that he wanted to photograph her for a track magazine. So Allison and her track team had apparently gone to some championships or whatever in New Jersey recently, and they were in the paper. So it's thought that he saw her in the paper and kind of found her that way and began following her. So he met up with her and said he wanted to take pictures of her. She met him near Varsity Stadium in Toronto, and her body was found 2 days later in Kingsmill Park. Her case remained unsolved until 1996 when police arrested a man named Francis Carl Roy. He was a convicted rapist who lived in the area at the time of her abduction and had trained at the same facility as Allison's track club. DNA left on Allison's body matched his, and he was convicted of her murder in 1999. Now, these 3 child murders were unrelated, so it's reasonable to assume that there was a 4th predator operating at the same time in the same area. Toronto is a major city, after all. But having this background makes the intense police investigation make a lot more sense. So, why they responded so quickly and so thoroughly when Jeanette reported her daughter missing, you really understand once you put it in this context.
Yeah, not to say that they're thinking that that any of these cases are linked, but it's a robust response given what they were enduring as far as investigations go.
Yeah, they didn't want another child's body to show up.
Yeah.
But, it's really interesting. And, obviously we talk about the police response in these cases that we cover. And a lot of times they are severely lacking. In this case, when you really have the best possible scenario in terms of a response, it's still amazing to me, what ends up getting missed. So in this case, they had hundreds of police officers working on it, thousands of man hours put in, and hundreds of thousands of dollars spent, but tips still seemingly got missed. Just a day or two after Nicole's abduction, Billie Jo Player and her mom were feeding their horses in Springwater Township, about 120 kilometers from Toronto. All of a sudden, they heard a little girl screaming. According to Billie Jo, they heard the little girl scream, "Stop, please, you're hurting me," and then silence. Now, they lived in a rural area. So obviously, hearing a little kid scream that is going to be disconcerting no matter where you live. But they weren't in a city. They weren't in a heavily populated place. Billie Jo's mother said, quote, "Oh my God, it's that little girl who was taken from Toronto," end quote. She called police and reported what they had heard. Neighbors who also heard the screams called it in as well. Despite this, Billie Jo, who was 11 at the time, doesn't believe that anyone came out to search the area.
Really?
Yeah.
And none of the none of the people that called the police, like, bothered to look around?
I don't know if they did or not. I don't know to what extent anyone who lived there searched.
Okay.
But yeah, so that kind of happens. The mom was like, oh my gosh, like, because Nicole, like I said, was already all over the news.
Yeah.
And so they immediately made that connection. But according to them, or according to Billy Joe, again, who was a child at the time, they don't think anything really came of this tip. Billy Joe was interviewed by the Toronto Star in 2020 about this, and she said that she never forgot what she heard that day, saying that she still had nightmares over it. She told reporter Michelle Mandel that she absolutely believed she heard Nicole Morin being killed. She said, quote, "It still haunts me. I can still hear her screams. I really feel like she's a part of me, and I've always wished I could have saved her even though I was still little." End quote. While this tip was seemingly missed by investigators at the time, they did go down many different avenues. The parents, of course, were the first suspects, but they were eventually cleared, along with anybody else in Nicole's life. So all of their friends, acquaintances, everybody at some point in the investigation was cleared.
Including her father.
Yes. And like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about him.
I didn't know whether that was the only thing, mentioned.
So Jeanette was with the children in her care all day. So it's pretty easy to verify her whereabouts. And Abe, the father, apparently did also have an alibi. I haven't read specifically what the alibi was.
I mean, is he even living in Toronto?
I think he was living in the greater Toronto area, but not in Toronto itself.
Okay.
Part of what made Nicole's disappearance so baffling was the speed with which it happened. We know that Nicole left her apartment by 11 and she was never seen by Jen in the lobby.
Right. So then Jen made that phone call. So within 15 minutes, she's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know where. We don't know whether it was into an apartment or out of the building or whatever. But we do know with the police response 4 hours later, she definitely was not in the building.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there would have been a way that she could have been in the building and have been missed. So what happened between the 20th floor and the lobby? According to a book called Unsolved True Canadian Cold Cases by Robert Hushowski, police uncovered precious few clues from the building. The best lead that they had was from a woman who lived on the 7th floor. She recognized Nicole from a photo the police showed. Now, the author doesn't specify where she spotted Nicole, but given that she lived on the 7th floor, it would stand to reason that she saw her on the elevator.
Right.
But I have no idea on what floor or which direction the elevator was traveling. So if she was going up to her apartment or coming down from her apartment or
And this woman is saying that she recognized her.
Yeah, that she had seen her
saw
that morning.
that day.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, Nicole had also been in the lobby beforehand.
Right.
So, there's also a possibility that maybe she saw her on that trip and not the pool trip.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, too, because over the years, there have been interviews with different investigators, and some of them say that, she was last seen on the elevator, but others say that there's no proof she ever got on the elevator. So,
yeah.
We really don't know. But in the book, they call this neighbor on the 7th floor the last known person to see Nicole alive. But again, I don't see that in a lot of other places.
When she actually saw Nicole, so.
Toronto Police Staff Sergeant John Luby headed Nicole's investigation. He said, quote, "That's the last she was seen, but it leaves the dilemma of what happened to her. No one saw her after that." End quote. And again, that quote is from the book, so take that for what you will. The only other odd sighting in the building wasn't of Nicole, but of a mysterious woman. One of Nicole and Jeanette's neighbors recalled seeing a woman holding a notebook on the 20th floor of the building about 45 minutes prior to Nicole's disappearance. The neighbor had never seen this woman before. She was around 35 years old and wore a white skirt with a black pattern and a white or cream-colored blouse with white or cream-colored high heels. She had dark blonde hair that was parted on the left. She was apparently very attractive and, just looked professional and nice, but she was standing with this notepad on the opposite end of the hallway of Nicole's apartment, and she was just there. So like that in and of itself was kind of weird to the neighbor. And then once the neighbor found out what happened to Nicole, obviously it became a lot weirder.
Yeah.
The police obviously tried to identify her. They had the neighbor make a sketch. They published the sketch in the newspaper and said like, hey, we think this person might have witnessed Nicole leaving. We think that this person might have witnessed Nicole's abductor. You know, please come forward. We really would like to talk to you. But they never found the woman. No one ever came forward. What's so haunting about this disappearance is that those were the only clues that were uncovered in the investigation, the initial investigation.
Jesus, really?
Yeah.
Just the sighting of a random woman on the floor holding a notebook on the same floor as
on the same floor.
As
and
her,
then like the neighbor who from the 7th floor.
that may or may not have seen her. We don't know the timing of when she saw
Right.
her. So, wow. Jeez.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot to go on there.
Yeah. I mean, which is insane considering the amount of officers working on this and how seriously they were taking this case.
Well, and how many people were in the building. I mean,
right.
You know, I mean, I get it. It's like a weekday or whatever. So
I'm sure a lot of people are at work or whatever,
sure, but you still have a lot of people in that building.
Yeah, and Nicole was
and
wearing...
nobody saw her.
No, and she was wearing like bright clothes. She's wearing like this peach bathing suit, red tennis shoes, a green headband. Like, you know, she stood out. She wasn't blending in with the crowd. Police had briefly thought that they had found items related to Nicole's disappearance in early November 1985. So, I mean, we're talking months later. They uncovered a black plastic garbage bag that contained a black jacket, pants, and a newspaper from July 31st with Nicole on the cover. So again, the day after she went missing. The items obviously didn't belong to Nicole, and police couldn't find any further connection. Toronto police put together a 20-person task force and questioned over 6,000 people in the first 6 months of the investigation, including hundreds of sex offenders. A $100,000 reward was also offered, which in 1985...
I know, that's retirement money.
Oh my goodness. And by the way, that reward still stands to this day. But it was all to no avail. Jeanette and Abe, who were separated at the time, reconnected over their shared grief. And Abe moved into the penthouse apartment from where his daughter disappeared. He was working as a driver for a cleaner at the time, from what I understand. And I don't know, I think it might be like one of those cleaners that maybe, you know, goes to like businesses and cleans their linens or uniforms or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think it might have been that type of situation. But he eventually quit his job and devoted himself to the pursuit of finding his daughter. He rented an office and raised funds to hire a private investigator, a move that police were against. Because, you know, again, they're like, we're doing our own investigation. We don't want you muddying the waters. And he was just like, well,
sure.
I don't care.
Yeah,
you know?
I don't blame him.
Well, no, not at all. Abe would tell reporters that as a father, he felt the need to do everything in his power to bring his little girl home.
Yeah, absolutely.
After about a year, Abe and Jeanette separated once again and did eventually divorce. Abe kept up his search, and Jeanette tried to find her daughter in her own way and even consulting psychics. Nicole's task force remained in place for years before finally being disbanded. But Nicole's case, though cold, was never relegated to dusty file boxes, as so many cold cases are. As the years passed, new investigators would come in and put new eyes on it. Interestingly, one of these investigators was Detective Constable Melissa Elichuk, a childhood friend and neighbor of Nicole's.
Get the fuck out of here. Really?
I don't know why that like made me emotional.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, to think about her, like, keeping that with her. I don't know. She told the Toronto Star in 2019, quote, "Nicole and I would walk to school together every day. We had a lot of fun playing together. We would make our own fun using our imaginations and play outside, and we used to go swimming all the time in the pool that was for our particular building," end quote. Her friend's abduction almost certainly informed Melissa's future career choice, and it's just one example of the lasting effects of this case. Melissa told the paper, quote, "There was a societal shift that came about. The innocence was kind of shattered or ripped away from the community at the time, end quote. Over the years, not finding Nicole's body was a double-edged sword for her loved ones. The other missing Toronto girls were tragically murdered, but the hope has always remained that Nicole is out there somewhere. In 2004, in fact, a Belgian organization believed that they had found her. The organization, known in North America as Foundation Princess of Croix, was founded in 2003 by Jacqueline de Croix and her sister, Princess Maria Massimo Lancelotti. This foundation collects data on missing children and attempts to match them to images of children found in child sex abuse material. In 1998, a large-scale pedophilia ring was uncovered in the Dutch town of Zandvoort. Some of the faces of children that had been featured in the C-SAM materials were released, and 2 volunteers from the foundation believe that Nicole was one of the children. They used biometrical analysis to determine if the photos found were a match to Nicole, and according to Jacqueline de Croix, the images were so close that they cannot be ignored. The foundation's website goes into detail about what they found, saying, quote, "The foundation made a biometric analysis which compares most negligible measures between the faces, points that do not vary with age, the weight, or surgical operations, such as the distance between the pupils, the nostrils, or the shape of the zygomatic muscle. The identification is considered undeniable as from a matrix difference lower than 300 points correlation. This analysis revealed a matrix difference in 285.429 points, thus lower than 300. Nicole is incontestably a victim of Zandvoort since her photo has landed in the file of this pedocriminal network based in Holland." End quote.
Right, but let's assume that that photo is of her. The photo ended up there. There's no evidence that she may have ended up there.
Right, and they do say that. They say they don't believe that she was necessarily taken to Holland or anything like that. All that they believe is that whoever did abduct Nicole shared the photos with this ring, and, you know, it eventually led to Holland. But yeah, they don't think that she necessarily ever left Canada, for instance.
Yeah. Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. Despite this organization's certainty that they had found Nicole, it is unclear if Canadian investigators followed up on this lead or to what extent if they did. Because it's really interesting. I got this information directly from their website, and it's been mentioned in like Web Sleuths forums, for instance, and, you know, some of the articles that have been written. It's also mentioned in that book that I was talking about in the beginning of the episode. But I've never read anything directly from investigators talking about it one way or another. Like, I've never read anything that where an investigator said, "Oh yeah, we looked at this and we don't think it's her," or, you know, anything really. So I have no idea if this was really ever investigated.
I mean, they could be taking advantage, the investigators could be taking advantage of the fact that it is a cold case, and even though it's still garnering some media attention, it's not garnering a lot of media attention. So perhaps they are leaving out a lot of details and just kind of glossing over the main points.
Yeah.
In subsequent interviews so that they can keep things close to the vest if they have investigated it.
I guess, but this was 20 years ago at this point, right? So I feel like if, you know, they've obviously had time to investigate whether or not these photos were of Nicole.
Yeah.
And you would think that if they weren't, they would just come out and say that in one of the many, many interviews that they've done. But, you know, I don't know. Another theory is that Nicole is still out there, but not because she was abducted by, you know, a pedophile ring, but because she was abducted by somebody in her father's church. Art apparently belonged to what has been called a fundamentalist church at the time of his daughter's disappearance, though I don't know any, like, what the church was or anything about it.
It's a pretty broad statement.
It is. And it's been speculated that someone from the church decided to kidnap Nicole because of her parents' impending divorce. And I think that this actually started because, like, Art said something to the media at some point about that. But why anybody in the church would ever do this, like, has never really been explained. The investigation into Nicole's abduction uncovered the fact that this wasn't the first tragedy in Art's life. In 1961, his sister Gertrude was murdered by her husband.
Jesus.
Desperate to solve this case, Toronto investigators traveled to Quebec to interview this brother-in-law. Though it's said that he did hold a grudge against the Morin family, he wasn't anywhere near Toronto when Nicole was taken. He was apparently sentenced to death, by the way, but his sentence was commuted. And I guess at the time that police went to interview him, he was not in prison.
So he murders somebody, gets sentenced to death, and then they're just like, meh.
I guess. I don't know. I didn't delve too deeply into that aspect of this because,
different case, different podcast.
Exactly, yeah. Right? But I just thought that was interesting. Over the years, there have been more heartbreaking dead ends. There have been women who look like the age-progressed drawings of Nicole and genuinely think that they might be her. But there have also been hoaxers who have made similar claims. There was some 18-year-old kid at the beginning of the investigation who literally were like, oh yeah, we have Nicole, called police, the whole thing, and really diverted resources at a very critical early point in the investigation. And it was just a prank, basically. But, as in all of the cases, these events have happened over the years. Both Art and Jeanette never gave up hope. Unfortunately, though, Jeanette died of a heart attack in 2007, never knowing what happened to her daughter. Art still lives in the Greater Toronto area and is around 80 now. For decades, he kept up his search, contacting every Canadian embassy across the globe to make sure that they knew about his daughter. He followed leads himself both in Canada and in the U.S. He spoke to reporters on the anniversaries of Nicole's abduction. But after the 30th anniversary in 2015, he said he wasn't going to give any more interviews. It all just hurt too much. In cold cases that are this old, police agencies often say that they're still working on it, but oftentimes those statements just seem placating. In this case, Toronto police are still actively pursuing leads. So remember Bobby Jo Page, who I talked about earlier, the little girl who swears that she and her mother heard Nicole screaming near their rural home?
Yeah.
In 2014, she reached back out after police put out a new plea for information. This time, her tip triggered a search of 100 acres of woods near what is now their former home. They didn't find Nicole, but it wasn't for lack of trying. In 2022, it appears that police may have revisited the site. In a Toronto Star article from that year, it states that investigators returned to the site of a 2014 tip about where Nicole's remains could possibly be located. The search again turned up nothing, but the context of this new search was a possible connection between Nicole's disappearance and the 1984 murder of Christine Jessup, which we talked about earlier in the episode. Now, in that one, DNA testing determined that a telephone worker named Calvin Hoover was responsible for her murder, but he died by suicide in 2015. Detective Stella Carras told the Star, quote, "I think he's a pretty definite person of interest in this case. We just can't find the ties yet. It's just frustrating because we can't talk to him because he's passed away." End quote. Now, like I said, he was a telephone worker and he traveled all over the area and apparently lived in the midpoint between Christine and Nicole. Around this time in 2022, they were actually looking at him for a bunch of different crimes and were really trying to reconstruct his life, a timeline of his life, to see exactly where he was living, where he was traveling, where he was working, and to see where he was as much as possible, to see if he could potentially be responsible not only for Nicole's abduction, but for other abductions and or murders as well.
Well, I feel like it would be relatively easy to figure out whether he had ever visited Nicole's building on a call, because
on a professional call,
call, which would be the only logical tie-in as to how he would have ever come across Nicole.
Well, it could have been her school, it could have been.
Well, sure, but whatever company he works for would have records of the calls that he would have gone on.
One would think, but it was the mid-'80s, so I don't know. In a City News article also in 2022, Toronto Police Acting Detective Sergeant Stephen Smith reiterated their commitment to solving this case. He said that they had a full-time investigator assigned to Nicole's case in 2022, as well as several other investigators assisting. A main part of their job at the time was digitizing the decades of files and bringing everything up to what they called 2022 standards. He said, quote, "We're going to keep investigating this case. We're going to keep investigating the same areas. We're going to follow up every tip, and as we digitize, more tips will become available, and we're always hoping that one person will call in and let us know some information that we don't have already." End quote. Despite not wanting to talk to the press, as of 2023, Art Morin was still alive and still in touch with investigators. He hasn't given up on his daughter, and neither have they. At the time of this recording, we're approaching the 39th anniversary of Nicole Morin's abduction. Police are still sifting through leads and literal dirt in hopes of finding out what happened to the little girl in the bathing suit. The answers are out there, and they will not give up until they find them. Nicole Morin has been missing from Toronto, Ontario since July 30th, 1985. She was last seen wearing a peach one-piece bathing suit, a green headband, and red canvas shoes. Nicole is a white female with brown hair and brown eyes. She has pierced ears and a birthmark on the right side of her forehead. Nicole was approximately 4 feet tall and 51 pounds at the time of her disappearance. Nicole was 8 years old when she went missing. She would be 47 today. Anyone with information on Nicole Morin's disappearance is asked to contact police at 416-808-2205 or via email at findnicole@torontopolice.on.ca. You can see all the sources for this episode along with photos and videos at our website, andthentheywere.com.
And be sure to follow us on social, and Then They Were Gone Pod on Facebook and at ATTWG Pod on Instagram and TikTok. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe and consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It will help new listeners find us. And the more people that listen, the more chances we have of bringing someone home.
And we'll see you here next week for a brand new episode.
See you next week.
And Then They Were Gone is hosted by Kona Gallagher and Ethan Flick. All research, writing, and editing is done by me, Kona Gallagher. Theme music is The Stork by Ketsa. Additional music is provided by Kai Engel. And Then They Were Gone is a Little Monster production.